What would you do if a 9-year-old boy stood up in a packed courtroom, looked Judge Frank Caprio straight in the eye, and said, "If you punish my mom today, you punish the only person who never gave up on me"? Before you hear what happened next, drop a comment telling us whether you believe a child can change the course of justice. Because by the end of this story, one courtroom, one judge, and one entire city would be forced to see the truth they almost ignored. At 9:17 on a gray Tuesday morning, November 14, 2023, in Providence Municipal Court at 25 Dorrance Street, the room felt ordinary. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wet winter coats dripped onto the tile floor. The clerk, Maria DeLuca, called case numbers in a voice so practiced it barely sounded human anymore. If you believe real justice happens in the quiet moments, hit that subscribe button right now, because this case started like any other and then turned into the kind of moment millions would talk about. Nobody walked into that courtroom expecting history. They expected tickets, excuses, fines, and the familiar thud of a gavel followed by the rustle of people reaching for wallets they couldn't afford to empty. But sitting on the second bench from the back was a boy in a worn navy Nike hoodie, gray school uniform pants, and sneakers so scuffed the white rubber had turned the color of sidewalk dust. His name was Lucas Morales. He was 9 years old, too young to understand court procedure, old enough to understand fear. Beside him sat his mother, Alina Morales, 34, shoulders tight, jaw set, one hand gripping a manila envelope and the other holding a plastic pharmacy bag so tightly it crackled every time she breathed. She wore black Skechers work shoes, dark jeans, and an old navy cardigan stretched at the elbows from too many overnight shifts and too few replacements. Her dark hair was tied back in a hurried bun, and there were shadows under her eyes deep enough to make even strangers look twice. Like this video, if you believe exhaustion can tell the truth before a person says a single word. Alina had not come to court for a dramatic speech. She had not come for mercy. She had come because she had run out of time. The city said she owed $327 in parking and compliance violations tied to her 2008 silver Toyota Camry. Ticket 1, parking in a bus stop zone on Broad Street at 8:41 p.m. on August 22. Ticket 2, expired state inspection sticker on September 3. Ticket 3, failure to appear for an earlier hearing on October 5, which stacked on late fees she could not pay. To most people in the room, it looked simple. Rules broken. Fees owed. Case closed. Share this with someone who needs to see that the smallest cases often hide the biggest stories. But courtrooms have a smell when people are barely holding their lives together. Cheap coffee, rainwater, printer toner, and something else. Panic. It sits in the air like steam. Judge Caprio had spent decades learning how to hear it before anyone spoke. He noticed Lucas first. The boy wasn't fidgeting like most children. He wasn't playing with a phone, wasn't swinging his legs, wasn't whispering to his mother. He sat ramrod straight, fingers laced together, eyes fixed on the bench as if he were memorizing it. Every few seconds, he glanced at Alina's face the way children do when they've learned that adult silence is sometimes more dangerous than adult anger. When Maria DeLuca called, Case PMC 2311482, City of Providence versus Alina Morales. Alina stood so fast the pharmacy bag slipped from her lap and rolled across the floor. A small white inhaler fell out, spun twice, and stopped against the leg of the front bench. Half the room looked down. Lucas lunged to grab it before anyone could kick it aside. That tiny movement would matter more than anyone knew. Alina whispered, "Lucas, stay seated." But he didn't. He stood beside her, clutching the inhaler in one hand and the envelope in the other, and together they approached the bench. Bailiff Tony Rinaldi glanced at the boy, then at the judge, waiting for instructions. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression curious more than stern. "Good morning," he said, "and who do we have with us today?" Alina didn't smile. "My son, Your Honor, Lucas, school conference day." Lucas said nothing. He just held the inhaler tighter. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. All right, Ms. Morales, let's see what happened here. The city attorney that morning was Malcolm Reed, 41, pressed charcoal suit, blue tie, polished black Johnston and Murphy shoes, the kind of man who organized his pens by color and his compassion by budget. He rose, adjusted his jacket, and summarized the case with professional neutrality. Your Honor, the defendant accumulated one parking violation in a clearly marked RIPTA bus stop, one equipment compliance issue involving an expired inspection, and subsequently failed to appear for a scheduled hearing. The total balance due is $327. He said it like he was reading weather data. Elena lifted her chin. I know what it says. That line carried more steel than the room expected. Judge Caprio looked at her over his glasses. I'm sure you do. I'm asking what you want me to know that the paperwork does. There was a pause, a long one. If you've ever watched someone decide between dignity and survival, you know what that silence sounds like. It is not empty. It is crowded. Hit subscribe if you believe pride is sometimes the last thing struggling people have left. Elena took a breath. I parked where I wasn't supposed to park, I know that. My sticker was expired, I know that too. I missed the first court date because I couldn't be in two places at once. I'm not here to make excuses. Then why are you here? Malcolm Reed asked a little too quickly. The room felt the temperature change. Judge Caprio did too. His eyes moved to Reed, not sharply but enough to say, let her answer. Elena looked straight ahead. Because if I pay $327 this week, the lights get shut off. There were no gasps. Not yet. Just that subtle shift in posture people make when a case stops being abstract. Judge Caprio folded his hands. What do you do for work, Ms. Morales? I'm a home health aide. Overnight shifts mostly. St. Mary's home care contract. I also clean offices downtown on Saturdays. And your son? He's 9. That wasn't my question. For the first time, something flickered across Elena's face. Almost a smile, almost a surrender. He's my son all the time, Your Honor. A few people in the gallery let out soft breath laughs. Even Malcolm Reed's mouth twitched. Judge Caprio glanced at Lucas. And why are you carrying an inhaler, young man? Lucas answered so quietly the microphone barely caught it. Asthma. Then he lowered his eyes again. Judge Caprio had heard thousands of defendants. Some lied, some exaggerated, some told painful truths so plainly they sounded made up. Elena, he could tell, was not trying to perform. She was trying not to fall apart. He turned to the first ticket. The bus stop violation, August 22, Broad Street near Al-Jabari Pharmacy, time listed as 8:41 p.m. What happened? Elena swallowed. My mother's insulin ran out. You left your car in the bus stop. For 6 minutes. Malcolm Reed cleared his throat. The officer's report says 23. Elena's head snapped toward him. That report is wrong. Reed held up the paper. Parking Enforcement Officer Dana Kessler documented the vehicle unattended for approximately 23 minutes. I wasn't gone 23 minutes. Did you time it? No, I lived it. That line landed hard. Judge Caprio asked, why not find legal parking? Because my mother was at home shaking and sweating and telling me she felt like she was going to pass out. Because the closest spot was half a block away and my son was wheezing in the back seat. Because I made a bad choice fast instead of a better choice slow. Silence. Then Judge Caprio asked the question that seemed simple. Why was your son wheezing? Lucas looked up. Elena answered. Because our building's landlord still hadn't fixed the mold under the kitchen sink, and because that week the humidity made everything worse, and because life doesn't wait for you to get organized before it starts going wrong. There are moments in court when everyone feels the edges of their assumptions soften. This was one of them. But Malcolm Reed wasn't done. Your Honor, even if the circumstances were difficult, she still parked in a bus zone. And there's the separate expired inspection issued 2 weeks later. Judge Caprio nodded. We'll get there. Alina's fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper bent. Then Judge Caprio noticed the stack inside. Documents, receipts, a folded letter, a hospital wristband, more than someone trying to dodge responsibility would usually bring. What do you have there? He asked. Alina hesitated. Proof. May I see it? She stepped forward and handed the envelope to Bailiff Rinaldi, who passed it up to the bench. Judge Caprio opened it carefully. The first thing he pulled out was a pharmacy receipt time-stamped August 22, 8:47 p.m. The second was an emergency refill printout for insulin Glargine. The third was a discharge instruction sheet from Hasbro Children's Hospital dated October 5, 2023, the date of her missed court appearance. Malcolm Reed's expression changed, just slightly. Judge Caprio looked down at Alina again. Why was your son at Hasbro on the day you missed court? Alina closed her eyes for 1 second too long. Before she could answer, Lucas whispered, because I stopped breathing. And just like that, the entire room leaned in. No one knew it yet, but that was only the beginning. Because buried inside that bent manila envelope was a piece of evidence that would challenge the official report, expose a painful chain of events, and lead to a sentence nobody in that courtroom was prepared to hear. Drop a comment telling us if you think the city should waive a fine when an emergency is involved, because the next few minutes changed everything. Judge Caprio did not rush. That was one of the things people underestimated about him. He understood that truth is often fragile when it first comes into the room. If you move too fast, people retreat. If you move carefully, they reveal what they've been carrying. He lifted the Hasbro paperwork. Tell me about October 5. Alina's voice had lost some of its edge now. Lucas had an asthma attack at school the morning before. Nurse gave him his inhaler. He stabilized. They sent him home. That night he got worse. Lucas stared at the rail in front of him. Judge Caprio asked, worse how? Alina answered with the precision of a woman who had replayed it all too many times. At 2:12 in the morning he started coughing so hard he threw up. At 2:19 he told me his chest hurt. At 2:26 I called the after-hours nurse line. At 2:31 she told me to stop waiting and go to the ER. Maria DeLuca stopped typing for just a second. Alina continued. We got to Hasbro at 2:58 a.m. They gave him a nebulizer treatment, then steroids, then another treatment. He didn't stabilize until after sunrise. My court date was 9 o'clock. I called once. The hold time was 38 minutes. I hung up when the doctor came in. Judge Caprio glanced at the discharge sheet again. Arrival time 2:59 a.m. Release 11:43 a.m. Malcolm Reed shifted his weight. Your Honor, I'm sympathetic, but failure to appear policies exist because the court has to function. Judge Caprio turned to him. Nobody suggested otherwise. It was calm, soft even, but the room heard the warning inside it. He went back to the first ticket. Ms. Morales, the pharmacy receipt shows 8:47 p.m. If the citation was issued at 8:41 and if you returned at 8:47, that's closer to 6 minutes than 23. Alina nodded once. Yes, sir. Reed said, Officer Kessler may have recorded the first observation time, not the final right time. May have, Judge Caprio repeated, or may not have. Then he looked at Alina. Did you speak with the officer? Yes. What did you say? Alina's jaw flexed. I asked if she could give me 1 minute. I held up the insulin bag. I told her my son was sick. She said if she made exceptions for everybody, the bus route would back up. And did it? Alina's answer came like flint. I don't know, My mother was trying not to pass out in my apartment. That line hit the gallery harder than anything so far. A woman in the third row, waiting on a noise ordinance case, pressed her lips together and looked away. Judge Caprio asked the clerk, "Is Officer Kessler present today?" Maria checked the docket. "Yes, Your Honor, she's in the overflow seating." Heads turned. Near the side wall, a woman in a city-issued navy jacket and black boots stood reluctantly. Dana Kessler was 38, compact, pale hair pulled into a severe ponytail. She didn't look cruel. She looked tired. Municipal tired. The kind of tired that turns compassion into procedure because procedure is easier to survive. Judge Caprio motioned her forward. "Officer, if you would." Kessler approached the front, cheeks flushing under the courtroom lights. She held her notepad like a shield. "Officer Kessler," Judge Caprio said, "I'm reviewing your August 22 citation. The defendant says she was gone about 6 minutes. Your report says 23. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Kessler glanced at Alina, then back to the bench. "Your Honor, I patrol that corridor regularly because buses get blocked there. My notation reflected the total observation window in the area." "Did you personally see the car, unattended for 23 continuous minutes?" Kessler hesitated. That hesitation changed the air again. "Not continuously," she admitted. "I first noted the vehicle. I moved on. When I circled back, it was still there. I issued the citation." Judge Caprio's voice stayed steady. "So the report could create the impression that the vehicle was unattended the full 23 minutes." Kessler swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." There it was, first crack, first revelation. Alina did not look triumphant. She looked exhausted, like being proven right was costing her too much to enjoy. Then Judge Caprio asked, "Did the defendant tell you she was picking up insulin?" Kessler's eyes went to the floor. She said it was medication. "Did you ask for proof?" "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" Kessler answered honestly, which is often riskier than sounding polished. "Because I assumed if I started deciding whose emergency counted, I'd stop enforcing anything." Nobody moved. Then Lucas lifted his face. His small voice was clear this time. "But you decided anyway." Kessler blinked. Judge Caprio turned to him. "What do you mean, son?" Lucas looked at the officer, then at the judge. "You decided buses mattered more than my grandma." That was the first true gasp in the room. Alina instantly reached for Lucas's shoulder. "Lucas, no." But the boy kept standing. He was trembling now, not dramatic trembling, real trembling, the kind that starts in the hands and works its way into the jaw. Judge Caprio raised a hand gently. "It's all right. Let him speak if he wants to." Alina whispered, "He doesn't understand how this works." Judge Caprio said, "Maybe that's exactly why we should listen. If that line doesn't stop you, nothing will. Like this video, if you believe children sometimes tell the truth more clearly than adults ever can." Lucas took one breath, then another. He looked too small for the microphone, too small for the room, too small for what he was about to carry. "My grandma Rosa was on the couch that night," he said. "Her hands were shaking. She kept saying she was cold, but she was sweating. My mom told me to stay with her and count her breaths if she got dizzy. Then she took me with her because I was coughing. We went to the pharmacy. Mom ran inside. I watched the clock in the car because I know when you're scared time gets weird. It was not 23 minutes. The room had gone completely still. Lucas kept going. "It was 6 minutes and maybe a little more because I counted the songs, one song and then half of another." Nobody interrupted him. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something folded in fourths. A piece of lined notebook paper, creased soft from being handled too often. Alina turned sharply. "Lucas, what is that?" He didn't answer her. He looked at the judge. I wrote it down after because I thought nobody was going to believe us. That was the second revelation, and it hit even harder than the first. Judge Caprio leaned forward. You wrote down what happened. Lucas nodded. And what time Nana took her insulin, and when I used my inhaler, because my mom always says if something matters, write it down. Bailiff Rinaldi took the paper carefully and passed it to the bench. It was written in pencil, heavy pressure, child-sized print, some words misspelled, but the times were clear. 8:40 parked, 8:47 mom back, 8:53 home, 9:01 Nana better. Underneath, in smaller writing, Mom was crying in kitchen when she thought I was brushing my teeth. No one in the room made a sound. Judge Caprio stared at the page longer than anyone expected. Then he set it down and removed his glasses. When a courtroom goes quiet like that, it isn't silence, it is recognition. Malcolm Reed cleared his throat again, but this time there was no stiffness in it. Your Honor, perhaps the first citation merits reconsideration, but the inspection violation remains. Everything could have ended there. A partial win, a reduced fine, just enough relief to call it compassion and move on. But then Judge Caprio asked one more question, and the whole case opened wider than anyone expected. Ms. Morales, why was your inspection expired? Alina's posture changed instantly. The wall came back up. Because it was. That's not an answer. No, Your Honor, it's the only one I can afford. You can afford the truth in this courtroom. Her eyes flashed. Can I afford it outside the courtroom? That line cut through the room like broken glass. Judge Caprio let the silence sit. He had seen this before. People who would rather be thought careless than exposed as desperate. Then from the gallery, a voice spoke. Your Honor, may I say something? Everyone turned. It was a woman in lavender scrubs under a black puffer coat, carrying a canvas tote with the logo of Rhode Island Hospital. She stepped forward nervously. My name is Sharon Patel. I'm a pediatric respiratory nurse practitioner. I know Alina Morales. Alina's face drained of color. Sharon, no. Sharon looked at her with the pained patience of someone who had ignored pride before. Yes, Alina, enough. Judge Caprio nodded. Come forward. Sharon approached the rail. I'm off duty today. I came because Alina wasn't going to tell the full story. Alina whispered, please. Sharon turned to the bench. The inspection sticker expired because her car needed front brake work and an emissions repair she couldn't pay for all at once. She'd been trying to save for it. She works nights. She brings elderly patients to appointments when their regular aides cancel. She has a mother with diabetes and early kidney failure at home. Her son has asthma severe enough that I know his chart without looking. She's not irresponsible. She's triaging disaster. That phrase rippled through the room. Triaging disaster. A quote built for headlines. A quote built for thumbnails. A quote built for the internet to repeat. Judge Caprio asked, how do you know all this? Because I treated Lucas twice. And because Alina still apologized to me for arriving late while her child was struggling to breathe. Lucas looked down at his shoes. Sharon's voice softened. Some people break rules because they think they're above everyone else. Alina breaks down because everyone else is on her back. Alina's eyes filled, but she blinked it away. Malcolm Reed sat down without being told. Officer Kessler shifted uneasily, her face pale now, because she could feel where the story was moving and because, for the first time, the ticket in her hand had human fingerprints on it. Judge Caprio folded his hands and looked at Alina for a long moment. Ms. Morales, I think you've spent a lot of energy trying not to ask for sympathy. I don't want sympathy. What do you want? Her answer came out cracked, a little room to breathe. That should have been the emotional peak. It would have been enough for most stories. But the day had one more witness, one more record, and one more truth waiting in the hallway. Because at that exact moment, Maria DeLuca received a printed memo from the clerk's office confirming that a municipal camera request had been processed that morning at the city attorney's direction. Broad Street Corridor, August 22. Exterior surveillance footage from the pharmacy. And the timestamp on that footage was about to prove something none of them were ready for. Share this with someone who believes paperwork is not always the same thing as truth, because what they saw next changed the entire room. The courtroom monitor was old and slightly too dim, one of those institutional screens mounted high enough to feel impersonal. Maria DeLuca plugged in the file from a flash drive delivered by a courthouse runner. The city had pulled it as routine verification once the receipt discrepancy became obvious, expecting at most to narrow the timeline. No one expected it to reveal character. The grainy black and white footage filled the screen. Timestamp 8/22/2023/20:40:56. There it was, Elena's silver Toyota Camry rolling up to the curb, hazard lights blinking like a pulse. The bus stop stencil on the pavement was clearly visible. So was the rush in her movement as she got out, not careless, not casual, but urgent. She wore the same dark cardigan she had on now, same hurried bun, same body language of a woman running on emergency. Judge Caprio watched without speaking. At 20:41:12, Elena turned back to the car before going inside and leaned through the passenger window. On the screen, Lucas's face was only a blur, but you could see her hand touch his cheek. 1 second. 2. Then she ran into the pharmacy. Officer Kessler appeared at 20:42:03, approaching from the left edge of the frame with her handheld device. The room leaned and so far the benches creaked. Kessler paused by the driver's side door. She looked in, she wrote something, then she stepped back. At 20:43:17, the bus stop remained empty except for the Camry. No bus, no obstruction, nothing dramatic, just a still frame of a parked car and a child waiting inside it. Then at 20:44:02, something nobody expected happened. The rear passenger door opened. Lucas climbed out. A murmur ran through the gallery. The boy on the monitor doubled over, one hand on the roof of the car, the other against his chest. Even in low resolution, his distress was obvious. His small shoulders heaved. He was coughing. Hard. The entire courtroom seemed to inhale at once. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. On-screen, Officer Kessler spun around, startled. She took 2 quick steps toward him. The footage had no audio, but her body language had changed completely. She bent slightly, speaking to him. Lucas pointed toward the pharmacy. Then he lifted his inhaler and fumbled it. And this was where everything changed. Officer Kessler did not step away. She stayed. For nearly 40 seconds, she remained beside Lucas while he struggled to use the inhaler correctly. She glanced toward the pharmacy entrance. She looked back at the child. Then she reached for her radio. The room had gone beyond silence now. This felt like witnessing memory under oath. At 20:45:01, Elena burst back out through the pharmacy door holding a white bag. She took one look at Lucas and ran. Officer Kessler handed something back to her, likely the inhaler cap or maybe the citation slip. Elena grabbed Lucas, crouched, helped him inhale, then looked up at the officer. Even through the monitor, the desperation in that exchange was visible. No audio, no words, but everyone knew the conversation mattered. Then Elena picked Lucas up, 9 years old, lanky, heavy enough to strain her arms, and loaded him into the front passenger seat as quickly as she could. At 20:46:37, the car pulled away. 6 minutes and 41 seconds total. Not 23. Not close. Judge Caprio's eyes moved from the screen to Officer Kessler. Officer. Kessler looked like the floor had disappeared beneath her. Yes, Your Honor. You observed the child in respiratory distress. Yes. And still issued the citation. Kessler's voice was smaller now. Yes. Why? She did not answer immediately. This is the point where most stories tour. In easy, villain exposed, crowd chooses a side, justice becomes entertainment, but real life is messier, and the next thing Officer Kessler said twisted the whole room in a direction nobody anticipated. "I'd been written up the month before," she said quietly, "for discretion." Heads tilted. Kessler continued, every word harder than the one before. "I let 3 warning situations go in July. One was a food delivery driver. One was a grandmother with a walker. One was a father in a rainstorm. A supervisor said enforcement had gotten inconsistent on my route and that complaints were up from RIPTA. I was told if I kept making judgment calls, I'd lose field duty." No one moved. "So when I saw the medication bag and the child and the hazard lights, she stopped, tried again. "I chose my job over what I knew." That line sank deep. Lucas stared at her, confused in the honest way only children can be. "You knew." Kessler looked at him. "Yes." And now the gallery reacted. Not loud, not chaotic, worse. A wave of whispers, shake and exhale, heads turning to each other with the same expression. "You knew." Judge Caprio lifted a hand, and the room settled again. Officer Kessler's face had gone red. "I shouldn't have written it, or I should have documented it properly. I'm not asking the court to excuse that." Alina stood rigid beside Lucas, breathing through her nose, eyes bright with the anger of a woman who had been told for months that her pain was an administrative detail. Sharon Patel put a hand over her own mouth. Malcolm Reed looked like he wanted to disappear into his suit. Judge Caprio asked, "When you radioed, what did you call in?" Kessler answered, "A possible medical issue involving a minor." "Which unit responded?" She turned to the clerk. "Sergeant Neil Donnelly, Providence Police, welfare check, not transport." Maria typed quickly and found the cross-reference. "Confirmed, Your Honor. Incident log at 2052 to 2059 near 118 Broad." Judge Caprio's brows lifted. "Is Sergeant Donnelly available?" By sheer courthouse coincidence, he was in the building testifying in an unrelated towing matter. A runner was sent. People shifted on the benches, sensing something much bigger than a ticket hearing had broken open. This moment felt viral before it ever left the room. And Alina, she was shaking now, not from weakness, but from that devastating feeling people get when the version of events they've been forced to carry alone is suddenly visible to strangers. Sometimes being believed hurts first. Judge Caprio looked down at Lucas. "Son, did you know the officer called for help?" Lucas blinked. "No." "Did your mother know?" Alina answered without looking up. "No, we left." Kessler spoke softly. "I couldn't catch them. I thought the patrol car might." Then she said the words no one expected from an enforcement officer in open court. "I am sorry, Ms. Morales." Not defensive, not procedural, not polished, sorry. Alina's throat worked, but nothing came out. The power in the room had shifted completely. The city's neat case had become a chain of human failures, fear, and split-second decisions. But if you think this apology solved everything, you're wrong. Because when Sergeant Donnelly walked into that courtroom 5 minutes later carrying a worn incident notebook and a bodycam request form, a second layer of the story surfaced, one involving a neighbor, a wellness check, and the moment Lucas decided he would never let his mother stand alone again. Like this video, if you believe the truth always has one more witness. Sergeant Neil Donnelly was the kind of officer whose face looked permanently tired but not unkind. Mid-50s, broad shoulders gone a little soft with time, short silver hair, wedding ring, rain still darkening the cuffs of his Navy uniform. He stepped to the rail, nodded to the bench, and recognized Alina almost immediately. "Oh," he said under his breath, "it's you." Alina's expression shifted from anger to startled recognition. "You remember." Donnelly gave a grim half-smile. "I remember that apartment." Judge Caprio asked. Sergeant, you responded to a welfare call related to Officer Kessler's radio transmission on August 22. Yes, Your Honor. Dispatch sent me to follow up on a possible distressed juvenile and medication urgency. The vehicle wasn't located near Broad by the time I got there. We traced the plate to an address on Messer Street. The gallery was utterly quiet. What did you find? The judge asked. Donnelly took a breath. Apartment 3B, third floor walk-up. Front hall smelled like bleach and mildew. The boy, Lucas, opened the door halfway and said, "Please don't make my mom leave." Every face in the room shifted. Lucas lowered his head instantly, embarrassed. Donnelly continued. I entered with consent. The grandmother was on the couch recovering, glucose tablets on the table, insulin pen nearby. Ms. Morales was kneeling on the kitchen floor giving the boy a nebulizer treatment using a table. Top machine. She looked like she'd run a marathon in boots. Judge Caprio asked, was there any immediate threat? No, Your Honor, but the child was in clear respiratory distress. Not life-threatening by the time I arrived, but active. The apartment also had visible mold damage under the kitchen sink and water staining along the back wall. Elena shut her eyes. Donnelly opened his notebook. I documented that the mother declined EMS because she said she couldn't afford another ambulance bill. She also declined a follow-up social services referral at that time. Judge Caprio looked at Elena. Why? She answered flatly. Because referrals turn into forms. Forms turn into inspections. Inspections turn into people deciding whether poor mothers are fit mothers. No one in the room breathed easily after that. Donnelly spoke again. For the record, Your Honor, I did not observe neglect. I observed overwhelm. Another quotable line. Another truth sharp enough to last. Judge Caprio let it sit. Then he asked, did you record body cam? Yes. Has it been retrieved? Malcolm Reed spoke up. Your Honor, I was just informed the file was archived but recoverable. I can request a continuance. The word continuance hung there like a threat. Elena stiffened immediately. No. Judge Caprio looked at her. Why not? Because if I leave here with it unresolved, it follows me another month, another fee, another letter, another night not sleeping. No. Lucas tugged lightly at her sleeve. Mom. She didn't look at him. Judge Caprio turned to Reed. How quickly can it be pulled? Reed checked his phone, already in motion now, urgency replacing distance. It says 10 to 15 minutes. Judge Caprio sat back. Then we'll wait. And that decision changed the emotional geometry of the room. People who had come for their own cases forgot them. Two defendants quietly traded childcare texts. A man with a towing dispute stopped pacing. Even the court officers stopped pretending this was routine. When a courtroom decides collectively that one case matters to everybody, you can feel it. Lucas stood very still beside his mother, but the closer they got to full truth, the more frightened he seemed. Not relieved, frightened. Because children know that once adults start opening hard things, nobody can control what spills out. Judge Caprio noticed, Lucas, are you all right? The boy nodded too fast. You don't have to be brave every second. That did it. Lucas's lower lip trembled. He pressed it down with his teeth. I'm trying. Those two words broke half the room. Elena crouched immediately and turned to him. Baby, look at me. He didn't. She cupped his face. You do not have to do my job. Now he looked at her, and there was something almost painful in the honesty of his answer. If I don't, who will? No music could improve a moment like that. No editing trick. No slow zoom. Just a child asking the question too many children learn too early. The woman from the third row started crying openly. Sharon Patel looked away and wiped at both eyes. Even Officer Kessler's shoulders collapsed. because she could now see that the ticket wasn't just paper. It had become one more way a little boy learned adults might fail the people he loved. Judge Caprio removed his glasses again. He set them down with care. "Lucas," he said quietly, "what makes you think your mother doesn't have anyone?" The answer came instantly, too instantly, rehearsed by experience. "Because everybody leaves when stuff gets hard." Alina inhaled sharply. Judge Caprio's voice was gentle. "Who left?" Lucas froze. That was the question at the center of him, the one he hadn't meant to reveal. Alina whispered, "You don't have to answer that." But Lucas did. "My dad." There it was. The missing piece, the deeper wound, the third layer of victimhood that changed the story from a single bad ticket to a child living in survival mode. Lucas kept staring at the bench as if it were easier to talk to wood than to faces. He said he was going to come back after he got work in Connecticut. That was last year. He didn't come back. He doesn't call my grandma. He doesn't bring my mom money. He just sends texts on holidays sometimes, and then he says he's trying. Nobody in that courtroom could mistake the contempt packed into that last word. "Trying?" Judge Caprio asked. "And what do you do when things get hard?" Lucas swallowed. "I make lists." He reached into his hoodie pocket again and pulled out more folded papers. Not one sheet, several grocery lists, medication times, court date reminders in child handwriting, a page titled "Things Mom Forgets When She Is Tired." Under it, "Eat, call landlord, check Nana sugar, my inhaler in backpack." Alina made a sound that was almost a sob and almost a laugh, the kind that happens when your child loves you so closely it hurts. If you've ever known a kid who became old too early, drop a comment telling us what age you think children should be allowed to just be children. Because Lucas Morales had quietly become his household's backup adult, and the next piece of evidence was about to show exactly when that happened. While the body cam file was being restored, Judge Caprio took a brief recess without leaving the bench. People shifted, whispered, checked phones, but nobody actually left, not even those whose cases had been called and postponed. That alone told you this wasn't ordinary anymore. Sharon Patel moved to Alina's side and offered her a tissue. Alina took it reluctantly. "You should have told somebody," Sharon whispered. "I tell people things, and then they look at me like a report." Sharon's voice softened. "Not everybody." Alina's eyes flashed toward Lucas. "I was supposed to protect him from this." Sharon followed her gaze. "Maybe today he's protecting you." Across the aisle, Officer Kessler stood alone. No one was openly hostile. Somehow that made it worse. She kept replaying the monitor footage in her mind, every second of her own hesitation now magnified by consequence. She had seen emergencies before, some genuine, some exaggerated, but the truth she could not escape was not that she made a hard call. It was that she made it while already numbing herself against people's pain. Malcolm Reed approached her quietly. "Are you okay?" Kessler laughed once without humor. "No." He nodded. "Me neither." That exchange mattered because systems don't fail through evil alone. Sometimes they fail through repeated compromise until no one notices the distance between policy and humanity. At 10:06 a.m., the clerk received the restored file. Maria plugged it in. Judge Caprio announced the hearing would resume. "Sergeant Donnelly," he said, "we'll review the body camera." The screen flickered. Suddenly the courtroom was looking through the officer's own eyes. The footage began with the stairwell to 3B on Messer Street, dim yellow lighting, peeling paint, water marks like maps climbing the walls. Donnelly's boots sounded heavy on the wooden steps. On the audio, dispatch crackled faintly in the background. Then came the knock. The door opened. Lucas stood there in a red Spider-Man t-shirt and plaid pajama shorts, one arm wrapped around his stomach. He looked smaller on camera than he did now, thinner. His first words were immediate, breathless, terrified. "Please don't make my mom leave." No one in the courtroom was ready to hear it in the child's actual voice. You could feel the room react physically, shoulders tightening, breath catching. One man in the back muttered, "Jesus." The camera moved into the apartment. Rosa Morales was visible on the couch, blanket around her legs, face drained but conscious. Daytime television glowed silently in the corner. On the kitchen counter sat a gallon of milk, a prescription bag, and a stack of overdue utility notices held down by a chipped mug. The footage panned left. Alina was kneeling on the linoleum floor with Lucas seated on an upside-down laundry basket in front of her. A nebulizer mask covered half his face. Alina's left hand held the tube steady. Her right hand rubbed his back in a rhythm so instinctive it told its own story. She looked up at the officer and said, not angry, not defensive, just exhausted beyond pretense, "If this is about the ticket, I know. I just needed medicine first." Those words hit harder than any speech could have. Donnelly's voice on the footage said, "Ma'am, I'm not here to arrest you." And Alina, still rubbing her son's back, answered, "That's what people say before they decide something." The courtroom fell into another stunned hush. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the screen. The body cam continued. Donnelly asked a series of routine welfare questions. Was anyone injured? Was EMS needed? Was the grandmother stable? Then, from off-camera, Lucas's voice came muffled through the mask. "Mom, did we do something bad?" Alina turned to him. The camera caught her face fully then, tired, pale, young enough to still seem too young for this much responsibility. "No, baby, we had an emergency." And Lucas said, "Then why do emergencies cost money?" The audio in the courtroom speaker cracked just slightly on that line, as if even the equipment struggled to carry it. A woman near the front openly covered her face. That line, more than any other, would have clipped across social media later, not because it was rehearsed, because it was. The footage ended after Donnelly offered resource information and Alina, embarrassed, declined. The final frame froze on the kitchen sink, mold dark under the cabinet, leak bucket half full. Maria stopped the video. Nobody spoke. Judge Caprio turned slowly to Alina. "Ms. Morales, why didn't you bring all of this up at the first hearing date?" "I wasn't there." "At any point after?" "Because every time you explain poverty out loud, it sounds like incompetence to people who have never had to choose between brake pads and groceries." That was Anat, her line destined to live beyond the room. Malcolm Reed lowered his eyes. Officer Kessler looked wrecked now. Judge Caprio's expression changed from sympathy to something firmer. Not anger exactly, moral clarity. This court addresses violations. It is not blind to circumstances. And when circumstances are this serious, we do not get to pretend a balanced view tells the whole story. Applause nearly broke out from the gallery. The bailiff shut it down with a glance, but the feeling remained. Then came the next turn. Because Judge Caprio, wise enough to know that compassion without accountability becomes theater, asked one question Alina had feared more than any other. "Ms. Morales, did you ever resolve the brake issue and inspection problem?" She hesitated too long. "No." "Have you still been driving the car?" "Yes." "With your son and mother in it?" "Yes." A fresh tension entered the room, different from before, sharper. Justice had sympathy. It also had responsibility. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Then we have another truth to address." That was the choice moment, the consequence moment, the part where the story could easily flip and the audience no longer knows what's coming. If you're still here, hit like, because this is where most people get it wrong. Mercy is not pretending danger doesn't exist. Mercy is deciding what to do with it. Elena drew herself up again, defensive, proud, cornered. I know it's not good. Not good is one thing, unsafe is another. I had to get to work. That may be true. If I don't work, we don't eat. And if your brakes fail. Her eyes flashed hot with the anger of someone who hated the truth because it was true. Then, what would you like me to do, Your Honor? Teleport to my shifts? Judge Caprio did not flinch. I'd like you to stop confusing impossible choices with immunity from consequences. The room froze. That line was not cruel, it was surgical. Elena went very still. Then for the first time all morning the strength left her face. Not all at once, in stages, jaw softening, shoulders dropping, eyes shining. I don't think I'm immune, she said, voice breaking. I think I'm losing. And there it was, the breakdown, the emotional collapse the entire case had been circling. Lucas grabbed her hand. She looked down at him, then back up. I know driving it was wrong. I know that. But my mother has dialysis on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Davil Center. My son's school calls me every other week. My client on Waterman Avenue needs transfer help at 6 in the morning or she falls. There is no version of my life where stopping is free. The gallery was motionless. Judge Caprio's face softened slightly. Do you have family who can help? Elena laughed once, bitter and tired. If I had that, I wouldn't be here. Friends. People have their own lives. Sharon Patel spoke from the side. That is not the same as nobody caring. Elena didn't answer. And then Lucas did something no one expected. He stepped forward, turned away from the judge and faced the room. Not the bench, the room. The whole gallery. His small voice shook, but it carried. Can everybody stop talking about my mom like she's one thing? That line snapped every eye toward him. She's not just late. She's not just tired. She's not just behind. She's my mom. She makes dinosaur pancakes even when she worked all night. She sleeps on the couch when my grandma is sick because Nana gets scared alone. She keeps extra juice boxes in the car for me and old people she takes to doctors because some of them get dizzy. She sings bad when she's cleaning. She cries in the bathroom with the fan on because she thinks I can't hear. You could hear people crying now, not one or two, many. Lucas turned to Judge Caprio. If the car is bad, tell us what to do, but don't act like she likes living like this. Elena covered her mouth with both hands. Judge Caprio said nothing for several seconds. Neither did anyone else. Because everybody in that room knew this had become more than a hearing. It had become a referendum on whether institutions could still recognize a whole human being in the middle of a violation. And still, somehow, one more twist was coming. Because tucked inside Elena's envelope, beneath the medical documents and receipt, was a sealed school letter she had hoped never to open in public. A letter about Lucas. A letter explaining why the missed hearing and the broken car weren't the only emergencies in that family. A letter that would transform the case from sympathy into urgency. Drop a comment telling us what line from Lucas hit you the hardest. Because the next revelation made Judge Caprio put both hands flat on the bench and stare at the paper for a long, long time. Judge Caprio noticed the folded school letter because it had slipped partly out of the envelope during Elena's breakdown. White paper, official seal from Providence Public Schools, the kind of letter parents dread before they even read it. He lifted it. Carefully. May I? Elena's face went pale. I'd rather not. Is it relevant to what you've told this court? Her silence answered for her. Judge Caprio waited. He did not push. He let her choose. Finally, Elena nodded once. He unfolded the letter and read it silently. Then he read part of it aloud. Student Lucas Morales, Grade 4, Green Elementary School. Date, October 12, 2023. Subject, Attendance Intervention and Counseling Recommendation. Concerns noted regarding repeated tardiness, fatigue in class, and a written essay referencing fear of mom getting taken away because of money. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Judge Caprio looked up slowly. Ms. Morales. Elena couldn't speak. He continued reading. Teacher report. Student demonstrates heightened vigilance, brings lists from home, frequently checks phone clock, and reports helping grandmother with medication reminders. Maria DeLuca had stopped typing again. Lucas stared at the floor, cheeks burning with the shame children feel when adults read their private fear out loud. Judge Caprio set the letter down. Did you know the school wanted counseling support for him? Elena nodded. Yes. Did you follow up? No. Why not? Because the intake was during my shift. Because the wait list was 8 weeks. Because I couldn't keep retelling our life to strangers who hand you clipboards before they hand you help. That answer came like a snapped wire. Judge Caprio leaned back and exhaled. The room could see the weight on his face now. This was no longer a question of 1 fine, or even 3. This was about a child living under chronic stress so severe his school had documented it, a grandmother medically fragile, a mother operating in permanent emergency mode, a city employee enforcing rules through fear, a system structured to respond only after damage becomes visible. He turned to Lucas. Do you worry your mom will be taken away? The boy answered with devastating calm. Sometimes. Why? Because when bills come, she gets quiet. And when she gets quiet, bad things usually happen next. Not a single person in that room could hide from that sentence. Judge Caprio asked gently, has anyone ever told you your mother is in trouble because she's a bad mother? No, but people ask questions like they're looking for a reason. There it was again. Children hear everything, especially tone. Elena finally spoke, voice shaking harder than before. I didn't take the counseling because I was scared if I admitted how bad it felt at home. Someone would think he was safer somewhere else. A woman in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Judge Caprio looked at her, then back to Elena. Ms. Morales, listen carefully to me. Asking for help is not an admission of guilt. Elena laughed through tears. Maybe not in theory. Judge Caprio did not disagree immediately. That mattered. He knew enough not to dismiss lived fear with easy reassurance. Instead he said, fear is real, but so is the cost of carrying everything alone. That line hit with the force of a verdict. Then Malcolm Reed stood up again. This time there was no stiffness, no procedural distance. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Caprio nodded. Reed turned toward Elena and Lucas. On behalf of the city, I want the record to reflect that the first citation is now deeply compromised by inaccurate reporting. I am moving to dismiss that count. A murmur swept through the room. He continued, as to the failure to appear penalty, given the documented medical emergency, I move that fee be vacated as well. Bigger murmur, heads turning, a few open mouths. This was the satisfaction beat, the first real sense of justice served. But then Reed looked down at the file in his hand, and his expression changed. However, there it was. The next twist. There is a separate compliance hold tied to the vehicle's registration, Your Honor. The state system flagged lapse risk connected to insurance verification from September. If unresolved, the car could still be subject to tow if found in operation. All the relief drained out of Elena's face. Lucas gripped her hand harder. Judge Caprio frowned. Was she uninsured? Reed shook his head. Not exactly. The policy appears to have gone into temporary non-payment status for 12 days before reinstatement. The DMV hold remained pending because the inspection issue was never cleared. Elena closed her eyes. I knew it. The room, which had just exhaled, tightened all over again. Judge Caprio looked at her. Is the policy active now? Yes. Can you prove it? She dug through the envelope with shaking fingers and produced a GEICO insurance card, current through February 2024. Reed inspected it and nodded. Active. Judge Caprio tapped the bench lightly. Then the remaining issue is the unsafe vehicle condition and inspection. That was the hard truth returning. No villain, no neat salvation, just a dangerous car and a family that still needed it by tonight. If you thought justice meant one dram, attic speech and a perfect ending, this story is about to challenge that. Hit subscribe if you believe real compassion has to solve the next problem too. Judge Caprio looked at Alina for a long moment, then asked, "What exactly is wrong with the car?" She answered in practical fragments as if reading off a disaster inventory. Front pads, rotors maybe, check engine light from emissions code, passenger headlight housing cracked, sticker expired 3 months. Do you know the estimated cost? Mechanic said 862, if everything is what he thinks. Have you had a second opinion? No. Why not? Because second opinions still cost first money. A few pained laughs broke through the tension. Judge Caprio turned to the gallery unexpectedly. Is there anyone in this room who works with vehicle inspections, repairs, or transportation services? The question landed like a stone tossed in still water. People looked around. Then from the very back, a man in a red Carhartt jacket raised his hand. Mid-40s, grease still under his nails despite scrubbing. I own Morale's Auto on Elmwood. No relation, came in for a storage lien case. The courtroom almost laughed at the coincidence, but nobody quite could. Judge Caprio nodded, "Come forward." The man did. Name S. Victor Alves. Mr. Alves, in general terms, if someone had the issues just described, is 862 plausible? Victor shrugged. Could be if they're quoting high or replacing more than needed. Could also be less. Depends on the code. Depends on whether the rotors are gone. Pads alone aren't 862 on a 2008 Camry unless somebody's dreaming. A ripple of reaction. Judge Caprio asked, "Could you inspect it?" Victor glanced at Alina, then at Lucas. "I could." Alina instantly stiffened. "I can't pay today." Victor held up a hand. "Didn't say today." Judge Caprio asked, "Would you be willing to look at it at no charge for the estimate?" Victor nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Another wave through the room. Small, hopeful, dangerous in its own way because hope can hurt if it collapses. Alina's voice sharpened immediately. "No charity." Lucas whispered, "Mom." Victor did not look offended. He looked like a man who had seen pride in every form. "Ma'am, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering information. Big difference." Judge Caprio added softly, "Sometimes accepting a ladder is not the same as asking to be carried." That line would spread later, too. Alina looked trapped between humiliation and relief. "I don't want my son thinking people help us because we're pathetic." Lucas turned to her. "I don't think that. I think people are supposed to help." And there it was, the unexpected compassion beat. The child teaching the adult what community should have taught them both years earlier. Alina bent slightly at the waist, as if the words physically struck her. Then the final confrontation arrived. Not between Alina and the city, not between the judge and the law, between Alina and herself. Judge Caprio spoke with deliberate clarity. "Ms. Morales, I can dismiss the compromised ticket. I can vacate the failure to appear fee. I can stay enforcement on the inspection issue for a brief period if I'm satisfied you're taking immediate steps toward safety. What I cannot do is pretend the car is roadworthy because you need it to be. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears sliding now despite all her effort. "What I need to know," he said, "is whether you are ready to let people help without treating that as surrender." The whole room waited. Lucas stared up at her like this answer mattered more than the case number, more than the fines, maybe more than anything that had happened in months. Elena took a shaking breath. I don't know how. Judge Caprio nodded once. That's honest. Honest is a start. Then Lucas did what made Judge Caprio go completely still. The boy stepped forward until he was just below the bench and said, in a voice so clear it sounded almost older than the rest of him, Your Honor, my mom thinks if she puts anything down it will all break. But everything is already breaking. No gasp this time. Nothing. Just total silence. Judge Caprio froze. Malcolm Reed froze. Maria DeLuca's hand stopped over the keyboard. Even the courthouse HVAC seemed to vanish. Because sometimes a child says one sentence, so true the adults around him can't hide behind vocabulary anymore. Judge Caprio rested both palms flat on the bench and stared at Lucas for several long seconds. Then he said, very quietly, That may be the wisest thing anyone has said in this courtroom all year. The silence cracked into tears, sniffles, bowed heads, a full emotional peak, the kind that makes viewers replay a clip 3 times before they even know why. But if you think the story ends with that line, it doesn't. Because the twist around the corner was not punishment and it was not pure mercy. It was something rarer, a room full of strangers deciding in real time whether justice could become action. Judge Caprio looked to Maria DeLuca, call community resource liaison. Maria blinked. Here. Providence Municipal Court had a small rotating partnership with city outreach and nonprofit service navigators for housing, utility hardship, and emergency needs. Most people never knew it existed because most people reached the building only after the crisis had already hardened. 15 minutes later, a woman named Jenna Lee entered the courtroom carrying a tablet and 2 folders. Early 30s, camel coat, no-nonsense glasses. The face of someone who had spent years talking to people at the exact point where dignity and emergency collide. Judge Caprio brought her to counsel table and, with Elena's consent, summarized only what was necessary. Jenna listened without interruption. That alone shifted Elena's posture. Being spoken about is not the same as being heard. When the summary ended, Jenna asked Elena directly, Do you have shut-off notices? Elena nodded. Current amount, $211 on electric, $94 on gas. Any transportation vouchers used before? No. Any active SNAP? Yes. Child counseling intake ever completed? No. Would you be willing if it could happen after school hours? Elena hesitated, then looked at Lucas. Maybe. Jenna didn't push harder than that. Good social workers know maybe is often the bravest answer available. Then Victor Alves, still at the rail, cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may add something. Judge Caprio nodded. Victor looked at Elena. I can tow the Camry to my shop this afternoon if needed, inspect it before close, and if it's just pads and a sensor, I can probably get it legal for parts cost and labor from my nephew. He owes me favors. A small, stunned sound went through the courtroom. Elena's face crumpled. Why? Victor shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. Because I had a mother who drove on prayer longer than brake fluid. That line drew the first soft laughter through tears of the morning. But the biggest twist came from the person nobody expected to speak next. Officer Dana Kessler stepped forward. Every eye turned. She looked directly at Elena, not the judge, not the clerk. Elena, Your Honor, I know this isn't standard, but I'd like to contribute the amount of the dismissed citation to the repair fund. The room gasped again. Kessler continued quickly, as if she knew she had one chance to say it cleanly. Not because I feel guilty only. I do feel guilty, but because I made a choice that added weight to a family already under too much. I can't undo the night. I can do that. Elena stared at her in disbelief. Malcolm Reed's jaw actually dropped. Judge Caprio studied the officer for a long moment. Officer, the court cannot compel or formally broker a private payment in this setting, but I can acknowledge the statement. Kessler nodded. That's enough. Alina spoke before she could stop herself. I was so angry at you. Kessler answered, you should have been. More silence. Then Alina, still crying, said the words nobody expected from her either. I don't want your money if it's just so you feel better. Kessler flinched but nodded, fair. Alina wiped at her face with the heel of her hand. But if you mean it because you're going to remember my son the next time somebody says emergency, then maybe that matters more. That was the forgiveness twist, not sentimental, not instant, earned, conditional, real. Kessler's eyes filled. I will remember him. Lucas looked between them, trying to understand adult reconciliation in real time. Judge Caprio finally spoke. This is what accountability looks like when it still has a pulse. There was no stopping the reaction now. Not applause exactly, but something stronger, a collective release. The courtroom was no longer just observing the case. It was inside it. Then came the ruling. Judge Caprio straightened the file, though his voice carried far more than paperwork. On the bus stop citation from August 22, I find the record materially unreliable as written and the circumstances compelling. That ticket is dismissed. On the failure to appear fee, in light of documented emergency medical care for the minor child, that fee is vacated. A visible wave of relief washed over Alina. Lucas clutched her arm. Judge Caprio raised one finger. As for the expired inspection, I am continuing the matter for 21 days with no additional penalty during that period. Ms. Morales is not to operate the vehicle except for direct transport to repair, inspection, essential medical treatment, and work shifts only if no alternative can be secured pending review by the court liaison. If proof of repairs and valid inspection are submitted by December 5, the remaining balance will be reduced to court costs only. Not total dismissal. Not total punishment. Measured mercy. And then he added the part nobody saw coming. This court further recommends immediate connection to utility assistance, transportation support, and child counseling referral with evening access if available. Ms. Morales, that is not an order. It is an invitation I strongly advise you to accept. Alina nodded through tears. I will. Judge Caprio looked down at Lucas. And young man, I have something to say to you. Lucas stood straighter. You should never have had to become this responsible this early, but your love for your mother is obvious to every person in this room. Still, hear me clearly. It is not your job to carry grown-up fear on your back. Lucas blinked hard, then nodded. Judge Caprio continued, your job is to be 9. Can you try to remember that? Lucas answered in a voice that barely held together, I can try. Judge Caprio gave the smallest smile. Good, trying counts. That was the resolution beat around 8,000. The room felt it. The satisfying exhale after a long-held breath. But the story was still not finished, because the validation would come later, in the weeks that followed, in ways that proved this was more than a moving courtroom clip. Before Alina stepped away from the bench, Judge Caprio said one last thing. Ms. Morales. She looked up. Strength is not measured by how much suffering you hide. It's measured by what you allow to heal. If you've ever needed to hear that yourself, hit like right now, because that line alone was worth the whole morning. Alina tried to answer, failed, and instead just mouthed, thank you. Lucas tugged her sleeve. Mom. She bent down. He wrapped both arms around her waist in front of everybody, not caring who saw, and whispered into her cardigan, you can put some down now. The woman in the third row cried harder than ever. So did Maria DeLuca, though she pretended she was clearing her throat. Bailiff Rinaldi looked at the ceiling like it had suddenly become fascinating. The clip of Lucas's speech did go viral after that, though not because anyone planned it. Court footage from that morning spread across local pages first, then regional news, then national accounts. The comments were what you'd expect and what you wouldn't. Plenty of outrage, plenty of praise for Judge Caprio. But also something rarer. Mechanics offering repairs, therapists offering pro bono sessions, landlords getting tagged by strangers who suddenly cared about mold in a third-floor apartment on Messer Street. This became one of those moments everyone in the room knew would matter outside the room. But virality can flatten people into symbols, and the real story kept unfolding after the cameras stopped. That same afternoon, Victor Alves had Alina's Camry towed to his shop. By 5:40 p.m. he called Jenna Lee, who called Alina, who was sitting at Rosa's dialysis chair with Lucas doing math homework beside her. The brakes were bad but not catastrophic. Front pads. Rotors needed replacing sooner rather than later.